Hi, good morning and happy Erev Chag HaShavuos. We're on Daf Gimel Amid Beis, and we're up to Minah Hani Mili. And you'll see this if you count down from the top: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines down from the top, all the way over to the left, Minani Mili. Our mission is established that there are 15 categories of women who are erva, and they don't fall for yibum, and they parted their sorrows from yibum. And the Gemara wants to know first and foremost, how do we know that an erva doesn't fall for yibum? We're going to try very hard to understand the havamina, that a man could fulfill the mitzvah of yibum with the wife of his late brother, even if she's an erva to him. But the Gemara thinks that that's feasible. And then the Gemara is going to go on and say, okay, even if you have a source from which you derive the conclusion that an erva does not fall for yibum, but how do you know that she patas up hatzar? Now what the Gemara is going to do is going to quote a brisa that in turn records a gzeira shava between the parsha of Arayos and the parsha of Yibum. Because in both parshios, the Torah uses the word oleha. And we're now opening you up to the 18th pasuk in the 18th chapter of Leviticus, of Vayikra. So it's Yudches, very easy to remember. Isha el achosa lo sikach litzror legalos ervasa oleha b'chayeh. Now I read this pasuk out loud with every single word. But the truth is, I'm going to read it a second time, and I'm going to take the liberty, if you'll allow me, to omit one word and see if you get the gist of the pasuk. And if you don't, raise your hand and tell me we're missing something. Are we missing anything? I mean, I left out a word, but do you understand the meaning of the pasuk without that word? And the answer is absolutely yes. There is no justification in this pasuk for the extra word oleha. The pasuk reads fine without the word oleha, and we could certainly understand that the Torah is telling you that you're not allowed to marry the sister of your wife. And now we're going to answer up this question about the Torah adding a redundant word oleha by quoting the parsha of Yibum, Lefisha Emar in Parshas Yibum, in Perek Chav Hey of Dvarim, that's Parshas Yiseitza. Yevamot Yevamot Shomea Niafilu Biachas Mikol Arayos Hamuros Batorah. Again, this comes back to that point that I mentioned earlier, that there's an actual havamina, that a man would be chayav in Yibum vis-a-vis his brother's wife, even if she's an erva. And we don't know that an erva is excluded from Yibum. But Hakosiv Omer, right? Lefisha Nemar Yevama. Yavoleh Shomea, I think that the Torah is referring even to one of the Arayos. Hakosiv Metaber, the Torah is referring to that, and the Torah will allow a person to violate an Iser erva for the sake of the mitzvah of Yibum. A mind-boggling havamina. And for this, we need Gzeira Shava Lafuke. And the answer is Nemar Khan, here in the Parsha of Achos Isha, Oleha, and that's an extra word. But Nemar Lahalon, in the mitzvah of Yibum, it says Oleha. Ma Lahalon b'makom mitzvah, Afkan b'makom mitzvah. Just like later on in Parshas Kitetse, the Torah used the word Oleha in the context of the mitzvah of Yibum. We're going to take that and we're going to clone the situation of Yichud onto the parsha of Achos Ishto. And Afkan, here too, when the Torah prohibits you from having a relationship with the wife of your sister, it's b'makom mitzvah. It's a scenario in which the wife of the sister of your wife fell to Yibum because she was married to your brother, two brothers married to sisters. And the Torah is telling you Amar Achmana lo sika. So what we go back to the pasuk in Parshas Kedoshim, and we read it like this: Isha el achosa lo sikach litzror legalos ervasol lea afilu im makom yibum hi yevama she baila haya achicha vehu meis below bottom, etc., etc. Even so, the Torah is saying Isha el achosa lo sikach, to tell you that this erva lacks the mitzvah of yibum. And I would not know this if not for the extra word aleha and the gzeres shava to the word yivamal yavo aleha. Now we go on, and the Brisa wants to know, okay, fine, you've told me that there's no mitzvah of yibum. Okay, but what happens if his late brother Shimon was married to another woman? She's not an erva. Ainli ella achos isha. In other words, Shimon is married to Leah, who is a sister to Reuven's wife. But Sarasa Minayim, what about Rivka? In other words, Shimon has another wife. She's a tzara to the Achos Ishto, but she herself is not an erva. Talmud Lomar Litzra. The pasuk says Lo Sikach Litzra. Now the word Litzra is a verb, a conjugated word. The shoresh, the root of the word is tsara. Litzrar is an active verb, the noun of which is tsara. And the Torah is saying lo sikach litzra, lo sikach tsara, that this erev of achos isha is now extended to include even the tsara, even Rivka, who's in no way an erva to Reuven, other than the fact that she's Eishes Achid, but that the Torah is matir in Yibum. Now, our Mishnah goes a step further. Our Mishnah says that although Reuven is not allowed to be miyabim, neither Leah, his erva, the wife of his brother, his late brother, nor Rivka, the tzara of his erva, who's achos ishta. But the Mishnah goes a step further. And the Mishnah now tells me that if Levi, the other brother, marries, when Shimon dies, he's Makayim the mitzvah of Yibum with Rivka, and Rivka's status is that of its Soras Erva to Reuven, no problem to Levi. She's not a Soras Erva to Levi. So Levi is certainly encouraged to be Makayim the mitzvah of Yibum vis-a-vis his brother Shimon by marrying Rivka. And now Levi takes another wife. We'll call her Shena Sarah. Okay. And now what happens is that Levi dies without children. So now Levi's two wives are Rivka and Shena Sarah. Rivka vis-a-vis Reuven is a Tsaras Erva. What about Shena Sarah? She's a Tzara of a Tsaras Erva. Eli Ela Tsarasa Tsaras Tsarasa Minayim. Amid Loma Litzra. Now watch this. It could have achieved the goal of teaching us and blocking Yibum in the case of a Tsaras Erva by just saying the word Lotzur. But here it says Litzra. So you have two ratios. You don't need two ratios. Below Lotzur. So we have now a redundancy of an extra resh. It could have said Lotzur and not Litzra. You follow? It's the same exact word, but instead of 4 letters, it has 5 letters. And all we need is to convey the message that Tsaras Erva is out of the Parsha of Yibum is 4 letters. The extra word, the extra letter of the resh, right? So you have Lotzur. Now you're adding an extra resh, Litzra. And that extra resh is teaching me Tsaras Tzara. And then we're going to apply that principle ad ol. The Gemara asks, the Eli Elachos Isha Shara Rayas Minayin. Maybe when the Torah blocked Yibum, in the case of an erva, we should take it from the pasuk itself. That's the source for erva, and the pasuk is talking about achos isha. How do you derive the other 14 categories of erva? Amr, ma achos isha, miyuchedes. Why? What makes her different than any yibum, any yavama case? The erva, she's an erva vis-a-vis the yavam. If the Yavam would have a relationship with her, if he didn't know, if he chatos and the and the Torah says that lo tikach, that the achos isha, who has all these qualities, all these characteristics, she's different than any other Yevamim, that she has an erva. She has an erva which would generate a chiyuv kares, but basically a chiyuv shkaga of chatas. Is so too af kol shehi erva v'chayovim al zdona kares al shigosa chatas. Any other woman who, in terms of her status or category, has these three elements. Number one, she's got an erva, addition to Eishasa. Number two, it's an erva of a chiyuv kares, but basically a chiyuv chatas b'shogeg. Is he asura liyavam? Now, the impression you get is that this brisa is operating with what we call a binyan av. So when the Torah teaches me a halacha, a principle in one particular place, we analyze the characteristics of that particular category, and then we universalize them to see if we have other categories that fit those characteristics. That's called the binyan av. The strange thing about this sugya is that the binyan av is built on Gzeira Shavah. So you start with the parsha of Yibum. The Torah added the word Aleha. Now you go back to the parsha of the erva of achos isha, where the Torah added the word Aleha. That's going to teach you that there's no Yibum lo yikach in the case of the erva of achos ishto. Now we have a principle in achos ishto. We can run with the ball, and we can now apply the principle of binyan av and start analyzing the features of achos ishto, and then we can expand them to include other arayos. Keep that in mind, because to build a binyan av on a Gzeira Shavah is not so simple. Now the Gemara asks the following question: the brisa, Ainli ella soroseyen, Ainli ella hen soroseyen minayin. Meaning, we already derived the conclusion that achos isha patters up hatzara. How do you know that that's true in all arayos? Maybe that's a separate halacha in achos isha. In other words, the brisa is now claiming it is uncomfortable. It's not sufficient to establish that just like the erva of achos isha patters the erva from Yibum, she patters all the other 14 arayos. We need another derivation to establish that just like achos isha patters up hatzara, so too all the other 14 arayos patter up hatzara. And what the Bryce is going to do now, I mean, we can almost read the text without reading it. We can anticipate what's going to come up in the Gemara. The same binyan av from which you equated 14 arayos tachos isha, as far as the erva itself, we're going to use that same binyan av to derive Amrit ma'achos isha miuchedes she erva v'chayovet also don't occurrence val shigos achatos asur liyavam ve. And in addition, Tzoros Asura, Af Kol Shi Erva, V'chayoven Al Zdor Karis, the other 14 Karish Gios Achados, V'Asur Liyavam, Tzoros Asur Liyavam. Bikan Amru, the Brisa concludes the finale, and that is that's what we have. Now, the truth is that there are other features to the Erev of Achos Isha that might limit us. For example, you might argue that Achos Isha is explicit in the Torah, but maybe there are other arayos that are not explicit in the Torah. Also, Achos Isha is an erva from his wife, because he's not related to Achos Isha. He's only related to insofar as he's married to her. So do we extend the halacha of arayos beyond relatives of his wife? Like, take for example, we had the cases of Sarasota and Saras Islands. Yeah, but you know what? That's not really a good equation, because there, Rav and Ravasi, they're going to bring back the Erev of Eishes Achiv. Maybe that's not a good proof. But we'll see as we go along. This is something we want to keep in mind. Okay. Now, there are two more parts to this brisa. It's a very long, complicated brisa. By way of introduction, I would formulate Roman numeral number 1 and Roman numeral number 2 from here on in the brisa. Obviously, we could have started our counting from the first din of Erva, to the second din of Tzara, to the third din of Chararayos, and the fourth din of Chararayos and Tzaros. That would make this Roman numeral number 5. But let's call it Roman numeral number 1. The brisa wants to know, once the Torah added the word litzra, and we derive from litzra the halach of tzara, the isur tzara, so then why not draw the conclusion that the tzara of an erva is always asur? Forget about yibum. There's an extra word litzra in the parsha of Achos Isha. I mean, you have a gzeira shava of aleha that's going to teach me that this erva of Achos Isha and anything similar to it blocks the mitzvah of yibum. Good, very good. I have no problem with it. But we still have to read the pasuk itself in its own context, without gzeira shava. And the pasuk clearly indicates that the tzara of an erva is asura. Otherwise, the Torah wouldn't have added the word litzra. So let's take this pasuk and apply it in a context independent of Hebrew. Somebody marries the wife of my sister, and he marries another woman as well. Not only am I enjoined from having a relationship with the wife of my sister, I can't have a relationship with his second wife, his other wife. In the event that he divorces or he dies, well, there's no yibum of me. This guy who married my wife's sister is not related to me at all. And certainly his other wife is not related to me. But in the parsha of the Erev of Achos Isha, it says litzra. It's very nice that you can add and graft the parsha of Yibum onto Achos Isha, but Achos Isha is independent of Yibum, obviously. I mean, it's an erva unto itself. So somebody marries the wife of my sister, he's not related to me. She's the wife of my sister, she's an erva. Has nothing to do with Yibum. There's no Yibum over here. So that's going to be Roman numeral number 1. And we'll soon see that there's going to be even a Kal Vachomer. If in the context of the mitzvah of Yibum, the Torah says that you can't be miyabim the tzara of your erva, how much more so if there's no mitzvah of Yibum? Once the Torah has classified the tzara as an erva, then that should apply shalom of Yibum. That's Roman numeral number 1. Then we get to Roman numeral number 2 in this very long, complicated Bryce. And the Bryce wants to know the following. You want to derive from the parsha of Oleha in Achos Isha that there's no Yibum in the case of an Erev. What do you need that for? Is there a Havamina that you would violate an Erva relationship in the case of Yibum? And the Bryce is going to go on. And even if you'll tell me that we have a principle of Esei Doka Lo Zaseh. For example, if you have Kilayim B'tzitzis, so you could wear the tzitzis even b'makom Kilayim and Esei Doka Lo Zaseh. That's because the Lo Zaseh of Kilayim, right, Lo Silbash, is a lav like any other lav. It's a Chiyuv Malchus in the worst case scenario. But the Arayos, you're talking about a Chiyuv Karetz. Where do you have a precedent that Esei Docha Losas, if the Losas is so severe that it generates Karetz? We don't have a precedent for that. So what was the Havamina for which you needed a Gzeres Shava for Leo to establish that the essay of Yibum would not override the Losas of the Erev? The Havamina was it would, and therefore we need the Gzeres Shava to exclude that. Well, what kind of Havamina is that? Where do we find an essay that could override a Losas of Sheish Bo Kari? And in the cases of Chamoso and Bito, I mean, there we're talking about a Chiyuv Misa, Sleifa and Skila. I mean, so those are the two issues. So let's go one by one. First, we have the following list of arayos. The Bryce is now going to list 6 arayos. Now, what's common about these 6 arayos is they have a status of arayos chamuros, which means that they are more chamuros than the 15 arayos listed in our Mishnah. And they are Imo. Imo doesn't appear in our Mishnah. Eshes Aviv, which is my, if you want to call it a stepmother, it's not my mother biologically, but she was married to my father. Achos Aviv, my father's sister. Achoso me Aviv, my sister who only shares my father. Eshes Achi Aviv, so you're talking about my aunt by marriage to my uncle. Eshes Achiv me Aviv, in the case Sheyesh Lo Ban, the wife of my brother, my paternal brother, but they had children. These 6 categories of erva are more chamur than the arayos in our Mishnah because they are asuros behechrech. They are always absolutely prohibited, and that applies to all my brothers. So these 6 arayos will generate an erva for all the brothers in the group, in the household, as opposed to the 15 arayos in our Mishnah. And he writes here, I'm just going to read to you, he says, Kishem shein krovosav, kachem krovos li shar achiv me'av. It's not just an erva on Reuven, one of the brothers. These ladies are arayas for all the brothers, because they're all related through the common father. Now, we have a principle that Yibum only applies in the case of Achim min ha'av. And therefore, in these 6 cases of arayos, there's no possibility of Yibum. Why? Because none of the brothers could have been married to any of these. My brother can't be married to my father's wife, just like I can't be married to my father's wife. So there's no possibility of Yibum. So the Gemara now, I should say the Brisa, to be more precise, is going to dramatize, or it's almost like a pedagogical tool. It's going to mention these 6 arayos as paradigmic cases of someone who's not related to me. In other words, it couldn't be one of my brothers that married my father's wife, correct? It's somebody else who married my father's wife, which is fine. He's allowed to marry my father's wife. So there's no possibility of Yibum. And if I were to marry my father's wife, that's called a chayve krisis, ein kedushin tosim b'chayve krisis. So it would make no sense that one of the brothers could create a valid, halachically valid marriage to any of these 6 arayos. Yochal animar be'af sheish arayos hachamuros ha'elu. I might think that there's an iser of saras erva, even in the case of these 6 arayos. So let's say Ploni Almoni marries we'll call her the widow of my father, and he's married to another woman. Now, obviously, after he dies or whatever it is, he divorces him, I can't marry my father's wife, correct? Well, what about the fact that my father's wife is a tzara to another woman? This guy who married my father's wife married another woman as well. Sheyu tzarasein asuros. The Brisa thinks, fascinating meaning, that the erva of tzara exists independent of Yibum. There's no Yibum over here. It could be Yibum, as we said. But she's a tzara of an erva to me. So the Brisa rejects this. Amrit ma achos ishto. Miuchedeshi erva v'chayoven al-zod l'koris al-shigos achatz v'efshali nosei li achim v'asura li yavam v'tzaros asura. What makes achos ishto unique? I don't know why the Brisa bothers going over the same 3 characteristics that we mentioned before, because that's not really relevant to that discussion, because what we're really putting the emphasis on is that this erva of achos ishto is unique to one of the brothers, the potential yavam in this case. And the Torah says that if this achos isha that falls for Yibum has another tzara, meaning Shimon was married to another wife, she's asura. Af kol shehi erva. If you want to derive tzaras asura from achos isha, you've got to have an erva which has all these qualifications, all these characteristics. Not only is it stone and kar shigos chatos, but it's also got to be efshar li nase l'shar achim the asura liyavam. She only is asura to one yavam because she is a tzara to the wife, to the sister of this yavam's wife. Yatsu sheish arayos chamurus mi elu hodi efshar li nase li achim. It's impossible for any of the brothers to be married to one of these 6 arayos because they're equally prohibited from those arayos. is therefore Torah saying mutaros. And now the Bryce can add 4 words. Okay, but that's going to be a whole discussion, the extra 4 words. But before we get to the extra 4 words, I just don't understand why aim is on this list. Because they could be brothers from the same father. I guess he's saying in a case where they share not only the same father but the same mother, so they're full-fledged brothers. And if Imo would fall for Imo, then it would be impossible, because how could any of his brothers be married to their common mother? All right. Now, Rabosai, we get to the last 4 words of this section, what we call Roman numeral number 1 of the Bryce. She'ein Sarah elamei ach. So we have a double responsibility here. First, we have to figure out the words of the Bryce, and then we have to figure out why the Bryce bothered adding this. You know, the principle called Amosit Goreh. You know, sometimes if you add something, you just complicate matters. I mean, the Bryce was complete before it added these 4 words. He says the following: She'ein Sarah ela me'ach. It's very confusing because the words themselves, unless you add a little bit, make no sense. You have to add ela b'michin nafla lo liyibu me'ach. That the concept of tzara only applies when the tzara falls for yibum because of her marriage relationship to the brother of the Yavam. Yeah, Mamish had to fill in the missing blanks of them. So the Torah did not generate a status of an erva on a tzara unless the erva status of the tzara is coming to remove a zikas yibum. So that's called ein tzara el me'ach. And what the Torah is saying is that since this tzara is considered a brand new category of an erva that removes the mitzvah of yibum and the zikas yibum, therefore she now becomes an erva of eishes ach. However, if you have a tzara that's not eishes achiv, because there's no way possible that she could be eishes achiv, meaning as a tzara to an erva, because the erva is equally prohibited on the brother and all the other brothers. So in that case, we have no reason to create an Iser Tzara of Erva's Tzara. So the Iser of Erva's Tzara is an Erva whose goal, his purpose is to remove the mitzvah of evil. It's a very strange concept. She's not really an Erva. I mean, why should she be an Erva? She falls for evil. I mean, all she is Eishes Ach. There's no additional erva. She's not one of the 15 arayos. No, but she's a tzara to an erva. So the Torah is saying that in the context of yibum, the tzara of an erva does not fall for yibum. And if she's not included in zikas yibum, the male she's Eishes Ach. But it's not that she's an erva. She's not an erva. What makes her an erva? Tony Almoni is married to one of these 6 relatives of mine, and he's also married to another woman. What makes that woman an erva? In Yibum, the Torah is telling me that just like the erva herself doesn't fall for Yibum, so too Hatzara doesn't fall for Yibum. But in these 6 cases, it's just impossible to discuss Yibum. Because even if, heaven forbid, one of my brothers would marry one of these women, it wouldn't even be a valid marriage. Now the Brisa adds the following: Ashar minayin, Ashar shamanu onesh minayin. This is a very classic language in Chazal. You've already derived the conclusion that both the erva and the tzara, who are excluded from yibum, are therefore prohibited under the erva of Eishes Ach. But onesh, how do you know that if a person would go ahead and be miyabim one of these women and take, for example, the tzara, that he would get punished for Eishes Achiv? Whenever you have an azhara in the Torah, that's not sufficient. You need an onesh. Because of the principle, aim onshim elim kein mashirim. The Torah has to first tell you not to do it, and then the Torah will say, here's the punishment. So we know that these are rayos, starting with, of course, the paradigmic case of achos ishto, are prohibited, and that we derive from oleha. Now, the Torah says lo tikach, so you're now included in ashara. But how do you include her in an onesh? Omar Kra, pasuk again in Parshas in Vayikra Yudches. Which I think is the end of Achronos. Am I right? I always forget. The first parsha in Nochim is Yudches. Ki kol ish asher yaseh mikol hatovosa elu v'nichras hanafash sosus mikerev amon. So the Torah includes in the Chiyuv Kares all the arayos that are mentioned earlier in the parsha, including the erva and hatzara. So once we have the oleha and litzrar teaching me that there's an azhara, now when the Torah spells out the onesh of v'nichrasu hanafashos, it's referring to all of the arayos that were mentioned earlier. And where was the erva of tzara mentioned earlier? It was mentioned in the word litzrar. Now we get to Roman numeral number 2. Taima, the cause of Rachmana Olel. How do we derive the conclusion that there's no mitzvah yibum in the case of achos isha or any of the other 14 arayos from the word oleh? Holav hachi, in the absence of the word oleh. Hav, I would have said achos isha miyabma. He should be miyabbing the wife of his sister. My taima. The only possible reason, says the Brisa, is the Amrin Asi Ese, Bidochi Losase, that the mitzvah even should be doche, the losas of the Isser Erva, in this case, Achos Icha. Wait a second. We only apply the principle of Ese, Dochel Ese, Bidochi Lose, Velose, greater. A separate law that generates a few malchus. But Lotas Hashesh Bar Kares Mi Dochi. We don't have a principle of Ese Dochel Losase to override a Losas Hashesh Bar Kares. And at this point, the Gemara goes into a digression, starting from the word Vesu, going on to Daf Daled, to try to derive the principle of Ese Dochel Losas. But now what I'd like to do with you is on page Tesai in the Yalkut Bi'ud. So if you look, you have Tesai. Oh, you don't have Tesai. All right, so we have choices. We can take a break. What do you vote? I mean, you gentlemen. No, I'm saying there are two options. Either I read it to you and Balpeo, or we take a break and we copy. What do you say? All right. We'll see. If it doesn't work out, we'll have to take a break. The Brisa had a list of sheish arayos chamuros where we said that none of the other brothers could be married to any of these arayos. It's common to the entire household. So he says the following: Ba Brisa lahatir tzoros The purpose of the brisa here, what we call Roman numeral number 1, is to be matir the sheish aray, the tsaros, of the sheish arayos chamuros, kishenisu li adam zar she'eno ochel, echa, or ochel, eno ochel. B'tovsin lo bahem kiddushin. Somebody who's not one of the brothers can marry this woman and her tzara. Ulechora yesh lefarish dafka came. Mishum shali li'echav ein tosin behen kiddushin. Bim came ein eshes ach hacheres tzarasa klal. Meaning, if one of the brothers in a Yibum situation would have married any of these 6 arayos chamuros, there would be no din of tsaras erva. Why? Because a tsaras erva means you are married to a man who has another wife who's an erva, but that's not so. That other woman is not married to the brother, if it would have been one of the brothers. Upshita she'en la din tsaras erva. Okay. Chasav Rabbeinu Avram bin Ahar. Now he quotes one of the Rishonim. The Efshal Farish came. He's not willing to interpret the Gemara the way we did. Below is Kira Braisa Klum Mikach Shenisu Lacherim. You know the principle called Ikar Chasav bin Asefer. You know the Braisa should have at some point said that one of these arayas is married to an Acher. Acher means someone outside of the family unit. Eliesh lefarish, shenisu sheish arayos eluli achiv. Now, what would be the havamina of generating a status of a tsaras erva if one of the brothers went ahead and he married his own mother or his father's wife? Havamina. Sheyesh lesar es tsaroseim afal gavdi ein tafsi bei kiddushay achiv. Al zem shiva brayso she'ein tzara el me'ach she'ein atzara neseres el b'makom sheyesh sibas nefil even be'ervas atzma el shinif teres machmas tur erv avalo biofen she'ein ervas h's ach klal. Honestly, it's a very difficult havamina to say that there's a status of a tzaras erva when the brother married someone whose kedusha is not even valid. I don't get it. But that's Rabbeinu Avram bin Ahar. Now we have these extra 4 words at the end of the brayso. She'ein Sarah el me'ach. Mishum she'ein ha'erva mechadeshes al tzarasa iser erva bechudosh el rak poteres osa mizikas yibum. Me'achar shenifter mitzvah yibum shuv chozer ba memel lios iser eshes ah. You didn't call eshes ach shelo b'makom mitzvah. Aval b'tzara she'ein ha'eshes achiv ein shum siba lios. So what the brayso is pointing out here, by adding these 4 words, Ein Tzara El Me'ach, is that there's no such thing as an erva called Tzaras Erva. The Tzaras Erva is not a new status as an erva. If you were to write an exhaustive list of all the arayos, you would not add Tzaras Erva, but rather Tzaras Erva is removed from the mitzvah of Yibum, and she goes back, therefore, to the old Iser of Eshes Ach, like any case of Eshes Ach Shelo B'makom mitzvah. But if you have a tzara who is not Eshes Achiv, right? So somebody, what name should we give him? Some fellow by the name of Sam, right? So Sam married my mother, right? So the tzara of Sam, if Sam has another wife, she's not Eshes Achiv. She's married to Sam. Sam is not related to me at all. And that's what the brayso means. She'ein tzara el me'ach, meaning a tzara has to be a tzara of an erva called Ashes Ach. There's no way that in these cases that Sarah could be called Ashes Ach. She's not married to his brother. Ulefizeh siyum divrei abraisa, quote, Ein Sarah el me'ach, hu nesinas tam l'kol ha'omer li'el, she'ein sheish arayas pochus es Sarah se'eh, mishum she'ein b'mashmos halitzror, she'erva asur oseres es tzara. So meaning the status of the tzaras erva is that of an erva called tzaras erva. Ella machvashi p'tura miyibun, Yalkein ein din zeh, meaning tzaras erva noeg b'sheish harayah she'ein in the suas li'ah. So just to summarize, the extra 4 words at the end of this part of the Bryce Shein Tzara Mi'ach are meant to clarify why there's no din of an erva called Tzaras erva with regard to some fremda, some strange man who is married to my erva and had another one. But now he has the Tosas Yishar. So if you have a standard Talmud Bavli, I mean, I don't know exactly which Steinsaltz and all that, you will find on the bottom of your page a Tosas Yishar. Actually, I shouldn't say the bottom of the page. It really depends on each page. It's a little different. It's usually on the bottom.
On the side.
Yeah, here it's on the side. And second, I would say in my Gemara, how is it? I don't know. But he has here a summary of the Tosisha. Lule Tosefes Zu. If the Bryce had not added Ein Tzara El Me'ach, Hava Mina, Shedafka Tzaros Shel Sheish Arayos Mutaros. Mishum She'enam Domos Liachos Isha. Kilo Yitochen Bi'arayos Elu Diyo Noshos Echav V'yiplu L'yibu. Aval Shara Rayos Shemutaros Liachiv, or Li'echav if he has more than one brother, right? Yitochen Sheyu B'Makom Mitzvahs Yibu. That's true. Harein Osos is Sorseim. Afim Hein Nisuos Leish Zar Veloli Achiv. I'm not copying. I think we should take a break and photocopy it, because the language here is very heavy, unless you find it inside. You have it inside? In your Gemara? Mm-hmm. Where is it? Because I didn't find it. That's why I don't know. The Lamute de Rav, that's not it. Lamute Soras Memaenes. Oh, there it is. See, because the print was very small. Ein Sora El Me'ach. That's what, about 5 lines down before the end of the Omud on Gimel and Beis. And that's what he's saying. Why do you have to add those last 4 words? So we'll do a divide and conquer kind of thing. you gentlemen will look in the Tosas Yishanim. I'm going to look here in the Masifta. He has a sort of a summary of the Tosas Yishanim, and we'll see what we can come up with. He says, Hava mina shedafka tsoros shel sheish arayos mutaros. Right? Because in this case, it's not possible they could fall for evil. Aval shar arayos shemutaros li'echov itochen sheyu moko mitzvas yibum arei helu osos esos. Oh, I think I got it. He's saying the following, that when we read this brisa, we could easily come to the wrong conclusion. Because the brisa is excluding these 6 arayos because they're not similar to achos isha. Correct? Because if you read the brisa, it says v'efshar linaseh leha'achim or la'achim, meaning that none of these 6 arayos could ever fall for yibum. This is no way that your brother could have married you. If that be the case, then I might come to the following conclusion, which is absolutely incorrect. And that is that all the other arayos, like let's take, for example, Eshesach. Eshesach is not on this list of 6. Why? Because my brother married my wife's sister, and there could be an afila for yibum. I mean, that's a valid marriage. I married one sister, he married the other sister. So what would happen now if so-and-so, we called him Sam, he marries my wife's sister, and Sam is married to another woman? I'm allowed to marry Sam's other wife. She's a tzara of my erva, v'achos isha. And the answer is no, I can't marry her. Why? Because this is a possibility of yibum. In other words, when we exclude the 6 arayos, that's because those are arayos that are common to the entire household of all the brothers, and there's no possibility of yibum. But other arayos have a possibility of yibum. And if my exclusion of other arayos is based on the fact that they're not similar to achos isha, or what about achos isha or any other of the arayos, where there would have been a potential of you, because my brother could have married any of these arayos. He can marry my daughter. So imagine walking out of this brisa with the mistaken conclusion that regarding all arayos, except for these 6, which are common to all the brothers, the tzara is an error. Obviously, that's the most ridiculous position that you can come up with. But if you're reading the brisa as is, without the extra 4 words, you can come to that mistaken conclusion. Now, when the brisa adds the words "Lefisha ain't Sarah el Me'ach," it's coming to tell you that all the 15 arayos that are listed have no din of tzaras erva, because tzaras erva only applies b'makom yibum. That's what it means. Ain't Sarah el Me'ach. We're not describing the type of erva and categorizing them as whether there could be yibum or not, but rather the situation of the tzaras erva is their yibum. And now the Torah is saying that there's an erva called tzaras erva because there's no yibum. All right. Does anybody want to just, if we have another minute, maybe just to read the Tosi Shanim inside? I just have to check one thing here. Ah, very nice. Something unfair about this, that all the work is on my shoulder. Yeah, you'll say I'm getting paid. I don't know if I'm getting paid, but anyway. I just want to see. Let's see. Right. He says, the aftermake korek shishola brisa yochol shani marbe sheish harayos chamuras me'elu kavanasa lishol gam al chameshes harayos shalom makom mitzvah. If any of the Arais were married to some guy named Sam, she'imonu makishim afesh sheish harayos lachos isha kein yesh lahakishes tesvav harayos l'sheish harayos elu. The lesser is Torosayim, Avshalom b'makom mitzvah. In other words, if there was a Havamina, that in these cases of Sheish Harayos, there's an Isur Tzoras Erva, then by definition, or shall we say by virtue of the equation of all Harayos to these six, we're going to come to that conclusion with regard to all Harayos. Achar shamarnu she'ena sheish b'chlal hahekesh, v'mela af ha-chameshes re'ena b'chlal hahekesh, Kishe'ena b'makom mitzvah. Nimtza shetam lefi she'i efshal linase li'achim bo levayer madua ein shayach din erva b'sheish harayos v'tam lefi she'ein sora el me'ach bo levayer madua af b'chamesh harayos eino noeg din sora ela b'makom yiv. So that's where we'll stop. So the bottom line is, on both sides, there is no Isur of Tzaras Erva except b'makom. All right, then I wish everyone a Chag Sameach, and we'll get together, Mitzvah Shem, on Isrucha. Am I correct? That would be on Yom Shlishi. Are you still in the country?
Yes. Our flight is Rosh Hashanah.
On Wednesday night. So the question: are anything new from the flights?
No notice. I have friends.
Because my wife's supposed to leave Friday on Wednesday at noon. I mean, a little after noon.
Yeah, and they're supposed to leave
from here
to the States and
delayed, canceled, and that's Elal. Oh, so that's a question because it could be that Elal is different.
Yeah,
you're flying Elal? No, I'm not sure that Elal is different, but I know my friend Alan Dubin was able to get on a flight from New York a few days ago, and he said that all the other flights were canceled except for his flight, which was Elal. So I don't know. All right then. Thank you so much.